So, thanks for coming. This is the first of two parts on Buddhism. Of course, this follows up on some sessions we had last year on Vedanta and Sufism. Naturally, this is going to be, introductory and very basic. For one thing, I'm not a scholar of Buddhism myself, and in any case, I imagine that a lot of you may not have brushed up on your readings of the Pali Sutras in the last year, might need a little reminder of it. But there are some people here, actually, who do have a real background in Buddhism. I see Jeff, and there may be others who have had various immersions. And I think Pat, of course, has been involved with the Buddhist, is it the local center here?
Yeah, she's coming in.
And Susie Mura actually was a part of that center. So we have a strong Buddhist presence in this part of Australia. So I just want to mention that next week there's going to be the second part of this. The way I'm organizing it is today I'm going to focus on Buddha himself in the main part, a little bit on his life, and then on his teachings, some fundamental put the outline up there, some fundamental doctrines. And if we get to it, a little bit on Buddhism as a religion and Buddha as avatar. We could look a little bit on how Buddha and what he explained relates to Baba, and Baba's darshana. And next week, I'm going to say just touching on some of the subsequent developments in Buddhism. Of course, I don't want to make any attempt to get up to the modern era. I tend to be an ancient history guy. Once you get past about the year 1000, I kind of drop out. But even with that, in the case of Buddhism, do we have enough chairs here? In the case of Buddhism, Buddhism really underwent a tremendous amount of change, it seems to me. It got transformed in very enormous and fundamental ways. More, I would say, than Christianity or Islam or Judaism, which kept some of the core elements of their religion really all the way along. Like in Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam are still acknowledged by virtually all Muslims. And in Christianity, Jesus is the Son of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. All that stuff is central to most Christian denominations. But Buddhism got enormously transformed, sometimes to the point where it's hard to recognize. So we'll talk about some of that, some of the major new trends, especially with the emergence of Mahayana and so forth. Again, I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but I will say that Buddha himself had a huge role in my life. As a teenager, I was a rabid atheist, and I really went through a kind of a dark night of the soul on the matter. And I came out of it by discovering Buddha. It was really Buddha who changed my whole life. And when I heard of Baba at age 18, I recognized him as the Buddha. So I have a very strong personal feeling for the Buddha. Now, also next week, to mention this, there's going to be the second of these Saturday sessions. Let me just read this. Is that too small for you to read? Can you read, Carolyn, or not? No. Baba's Explanations on Creation and the Universe, an Introduction. While the Meher Ashram School for Boys opened in May of 1927, it was in December of that year and January of the next that a veritable atomic explosion of love took place among them, precipitating a number among them into experience of the higher planes of consciousness, and leading to the creation of the Prem Ashram in March of 1928. Over this very period, from December 2nd through January 14th, Baba was giving the boys an evening series of most extraordinary lectures filled with esoteric secrets about primordial cosmology. Oops, I didn't do this right. Yeah, I can read it myself. Primordial evolution and the journey through the planes. While the manuscript in which this material appears is still undergoing editing and has not yet been published, in this morning and afternoon program we will survey the history surrounding it and study some examples from what Baba was explaining to the boys at this time. I've been actively working on this the whole time that I've been here at Avatar's Abode. This is quite an amazing collection of talks, the source of which we are not really sure of, probably notes by Chanji, but during the very period that Baba was giving this series of 34 collected talks, the whole place blew up. You know, you may have read that story, you know, how the boys started weeping uncontrollably, and Chota Baba, one of them, Abdullah, is his actual name, actually had experience of the sixth plane, and the story of Ali, whose father kept bringing him home, and he kept running away from home back to Meherabad, all of that. All of that began right as Baba was giving this bunch of talks. And in them, Baba was explaining stuff that I never would believe he would have explained to a bunch of kids. But he did. It's really profound material. It's about, you know, the beginnings of creation and stuff about the sun and the earth and the moon that you have never heard of unless you've read this. It's nothing like what you got taught in astronomy class, I'm telling you. And the planes and skies and what's there. And this was, as to use Gary Kleiner's phrase, news you can use for these kids, because a bunch of them started to experience this right then, right? Baba was talking about the planes of consciousness and the different associated asmans or skies. And within a week, a bunch of them were there. I mean, it's quite an amazing episode. So far as I know, Baba had never explained anything like this, the Mandalay, and he never did again, actually. A lot of it is quite unique to this. So it's an amazing collection of talks, so that will be the topic of that day. You might have read a little bit about it in Lord Meher or something, but there's quite a lot there. Also, just to mention, on Sunday I'm doing a singing choral practice, and I can just hear the sweet, harmonious vibrations emanating from this room. So please bring them on Sunday at 11 at the end of coffee, so that all the world can benefit from it. Okay. Now here are just some images. I just ripped these off from the internet just to get the image of how Buddha was conceived to later generations to our minds. These are some of the famous statues. Here's an image of Buddha, I think under the Bodhi tree, and those are probably his 5 first disciples who had been ascetics with him, to whom he gave his first sermon. Here he is again under the Bodhi tree. Just a general picture of Buddha. Anyone who knows more about this. This is the, I think it's in Mahayana Buddha, I think this is called the Sambhogakaya the Bliss Body of the Buddha. And you'll see these three bodies of the Buddha referenced by Francis twice in Stay with God. You knew about this. Enormous, spectacular image there.
Where was that bought, that last image?
You know, I don't know. I have it in my...
Is that from Japan?
Is that
It
what
looks familiar, I think.
These things look Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look Japanese. It's just flashing back when I lived there as a kid, and I remember my parents were showing me a number of black and white photos they've taken of this Buddha. It might be, I don't know.
You know, the image of the Buddha is such a powerful part of the general idea and conception that many of us would have of him. And yet, as John goes to the first 5 centuries, they made no representations of him at all. They would show his footprint, or what else did they show? The tree.
Well, they
Bodhi tree.
Yeah, they had the Buddha tree,
And
the
the wheel.
footprints, and the wheel.
Yeah.
They were the 3 symbols they used. Kumaswamy said that that was Buddhist art, and then later on it was art about Buddhism, depicting Lord Buddha and that. But it was about 400 or 500 years before the first image of Buddha appeared. I don't know why, but
the same is true for, in a different theological context in Islam. We still don't have any images of Muhammad at all. And Buddha, of course, never made any claims about divine status for himself or anything like that.
Can I venture a little explanation?
Yeah?
You say you don't know why?
no.
I think the early Buddhism people do meditation.
Yeah, that's right.
Something like impersonal, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
that's
later,
right.
when Mahayana Buddhism came in,
Right.
it was more bhakti.
Yeah. The early
Buddha
Buddhism
began
was
to
to do
emerge.
with contemplation, and then the latter, when Lord Buddha appeared, it was
Right.
to do with prayer and devotion
Yeah.
to
Right.
him. Yeah,
Mahayana
that's right.
Buddhism
Yeah.
emerged just at the same time that these did.
yeah.
And some of the earliest statues were actually in, was it Gandharva? What's
Yeah,
it?
up in Afghanistan.
Heavily Greek influenced.
Mm.
So anyway, a part of our image of it, I think this is, I forgot, I should have made notes. Here's one, has notes. This is in Sarnath, where Buddha gave his first sermon to those 5 former companions in quest who became his first disciples. And Baba went here during the New Life. It was during the Langodi phase, I think in December maybe of 1949. And it was a noteworthy part of
They went right down into the
in the cave
catacombs.
section. It was winter, so rather chilly way up there.
Where is Sonar?
It's up in North India. I don't know exactly where.
Northeast?
The northeast part.
You need one of the woodcutters' cave. Cave 16, at Ellora, the beautiful Buddha. And Erich told us how Baba went there and he said, "That is me." Isn't it beautiful?
Yeah. Oh, that's one of the great caves there.
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then there's that depiction of, like up in Ellora Caves when Baba had Mani say in that one room with the Buddha, I am Buddha.
Yeah.
Right? And it was just, she said it was echoing or resounding or something.
Yeah.
It's so deep. I mean, she really felt the presence.
When Baba was a boy, at one time he had a sudden, I don't know what to call it, I'll say flash. He heard about the Maitreya Buddha and suddenly had the awareness, I'm that. It was just for a moment and passed.
His friend gave him a booklet about Maitreya Buddha.
Yes.
He opened it
Yeah.
and he says, "You come." as the future Buddha, and Baba himself.
He was that. That's the only case I know of where Baba had such a awareness as a boy in connection with any avatar that was in connection with Buddha. So this is the picture of the, now my laser,
No walking
connected
stick
by
today.
me with a laser.
Oh, yeah.
Is my laser pointer here again? Okay. All right.
All right.
Thank you. He was born in Lumbini. It's right down there, right on the next to the very southern border of Nepal and Uttar Pradesh. See down there? Here's I've shrunk it so we can't really see the context very well, but there's Kathmandu right here, Lucknow, I think Kanpur is here. So this is where apparently he was born. Now okay, so I was going to start then jumping into a little bit about his life. Again, go on chiming in, because a lot of you, with questions you may have, or a lot of you, may
Or just a
know
quick
things
one.
about it. Yeah.
The word Maitreya, what does it mean and how is it used?
I don't remember what it means, but
It means compassion.
is it compassionate?
Yeah, a lot of compassion.
It refers to a future advent of the Buddha.
So Baba's name somehow
Meher.
consonant is consonant with
Yeah.
Maitreya Buddha.
In Buddhism, over time, they came to feel that there have been many millions and billions of Buddhas over the course of the ages. I don't know whether Buddha himself ever said that. We'll come to a little bit of what he did say when asked about such things. Basically, the questions like this were not what he was not going to answer them because they'd be distractions from it. But we can go ahead and ask them because Buddha isn't here to reprimand us. Anyway, here are some basic facts about him. There's a lot of dispute about exactly when he lived. The dates that I had always heard were these, 563 to 583 BC. But now a lot of scholars seem to hold to a later date, saying he died around the year 400. I don't know what in India, dating is always a real problem because India never seems to have been very interested in chronologies and histories in that sense. Cultures like the Greeks or the Chinese were very attuned to that, the Indians were not. But it seems to be generally agreed on the accounts that he lived to be about 80. By the way, the accounts that we have all come from much later. The earliest very developed account was about the 1st or 2nd century AD. Actually, Jeff gave me that work, Ashvagosha's Buddha Karita. It's called a long epic poem about the life of the Buddha. But most modern histories seem to be based on something from what's called the Jataka tales about the 5th century AD. And there are various other sources. So I just know that with Buddha, there are no contemporaneous documents, and a lot of it sends to us through oral tradition. He died in Kushinagar, India. I didn't look that up. He must be in North India somewhere. He generally was Bihar, Nepal, Uttar Pradesh.
I think it's Uttar Pradesh. He died.
Yeah, it was in India somewhere, so it must be, I guess it could be Bihar. His name is actually Siddhartha Gautama, and he's often called Shakyamuni. The Shakya was the name of his clan or family. And I guess Muni would be part of the compound as a kind of a sage or wise man, I suppose.
Saint or silent one.
Yeah. His father is Shuddhodak, his mother Maya Devi, and he was married as a young man to Yashodhara, and had a son, Rahul. He was during, I wrote some of this up here, the Magadha Empire, and they seem to link him, this is part of the dating of him, to these two emperors, Bimbisara and Ajatasattu. He died while Ajatasattu was on the throne. So he's associated with this whole period in Nepal and northern India. He was a younger contemporary of Mahavira, who's the founder of Jainism. If you've been to the Ellora caves, there are a lot of Jain temples there. He was a younger contemporary of Mahavira.
Where does the name Buddha come from?
It's like a title. It's almost like Christ. It's the enlightened one. The word is like buddhi, intelligence, or something more than intelligence, actually. So it was like a title given to him.
Does anyone know if Mahavira and Buddha met?
There are no stories of it, so I would presume not.
But Mahavira's disciple went to challenge Buddha.
Okay.
Oh.
There was an instance.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And what was the name that meant the silent one? Tian, you said something?
Muni. Muni can be
Well,
silent.
Maun
Can be
means
silent.
that can it be a silent one? I know it's a sage or a wise man.
Yeah, the main translation is sage, but in one or two sources I read,
Muni.
the Muni can mean silence. Silent.
Yeah.
Does it also
Maun
mean
means
saint?
that now.
You
A
can
saint, yeah.
say, but it doesn't mean.
A
Muni
sage
has
would
a-
be a saint in that context.
Muni in Sanskrit, I think, does have the meaning of silence.
Yeah. Now, so when Buddha, the stories of him from the Jataka tales, so I'll just tell some of the traditional story, and again, throw in stuff as you may occur to you. His mother died when he was very young, Mahadevi, but his father heard from an astrologer that his son would either grow up to be a great monarch or a great holy man. And like 99.9% fathers in the world, he wanted option one. And to try to make sure that happened, he tried to protect his young son from any contact with the sufferings of the world. That's the story. So he was brought up in a palace, and if you read Ashwagosha's account, all the charms and delights, beautiful women all over the place, and all that kind of thing, were presented to keep him from any harsh contact with the world. He married. He had a child, of course. But then the story goes that it's in his mid-20s that all this occurred. He one day asked his charioteer to take him out into the town. And in the course of it, he saw an old man. He had never seen that before. And he said, "Well, what is this?" And his charioteer explained, "This is old. You'll get to be like this. This overtakes everyone." The next day, he wanted to go out again and saw a sick man. And he learned about sickness and bad health. He hadn't learned about the Mayor Health Clinic, which deals with this problem entirely. On the third day, he went out and he saw a corpse and learned that everyone dies. And then on the fourth day, he saw an ascetic. The word for this is a shramana. There was a big movement at this time of renunciates. And he formed the determination to leave home and renounce the world and to find a solution to this problem. So the story goes, in the middle of the night, he got up and left and sought out various ascetics in his part of the woods. This word shramana it means a seeker, one who performs acts of austerity, ascetic. The term refers to several Indian religious movements parallel to, but separate from, the historical Vedic religion. The dominant religion at this time was Vedic, you know, the Vedas. This would be like not the Upanishads, not Vedanta, like we were talking, it was before that. It would be Vedic rituals with sacrifice to the fire, recitation of Vedic hymns, some of the great hymns from the Rig Veda. And the Vedas were the great authoritative texts. But there are a lot of these Shramanas at that time who either rejected the Vedic path or else were, without rejecting it, were doing another kind of search. Some of them were quite atheistic or materialistic. Some of them were not. Mahavira, the Jain founder, would fall into this category. It has a very strong ascetic streak in it. So Buddha found several teachers in the course of this time and he learned meditation. There was a kind of yoga that was being practiced. And both of them, according to the story, wanted him to be their successor, but he did not feel satisfied with what he had found. And he entered into a phase of really intense austerities, eating almost nothing. I forget, it describes how much he ate, like an almond a day or that kind of thing. He was one of those people associated with a small group of other ascetics, Shramanas, doing likewise. But came to the realization, actually there's a story that a young farmer's girl, a peasant, brought him some milk, and he ate it, and realized that this kind of torturing of the body was not going to yield the result he wanted. And this actually led to the formulation, to the realization on his part that it's a foundational principle of Buddhism, the middle way, madhyama pratipad, madhyama pratipad. On a literal level, the middle way refers to the young Siddhartha's choice of a path between the extremes of asceticism and sensual indulgence. In later Mahayana Buddhism, with its articulation of the idea of shunyata, which we'll be talking about that more next time, it came to refer to a middle course between other extremes, such as the views that things exist or don't exist. Believe it or I don't know if you've studied any of this, but that was a real big question, whether the empirical world actually exists or not. So the middle way began with this question of indulging the body or ascetically torturing the body, but it came to be a very broadly applied principle in many, many other aspects. And practically every Buddhist that ever was is going to say, well, I'm finding the middle way, defining the extremes in one fashion or another. So this is a basic Buddhist idea right from that period. And he decided at that point that he was going to achieve liberation no matter what it took. And so he sat under a Bodhi tree, and there are all these stories about how the tempter figure, Mara is called, sent all these challenges and temptations and attacks, and Buddha resisted all of them and achieved enlightenment under that tree. And having done so, there are various accounts of this. We're talking about stories that were written down much later, but having achieved that state, he looked at the created world and saw that it was full of suffering, that everyone was suffering, and he had compassion on it. and determined to return to help the suffering creatures of the world. So compassion is another foundational principle of Buddhism. It's built upon that. Maybe this is a difference between the avatar and a majub. A majub would say, bye-bye, I'm out of here, but not the avatar. So he came back to the 5 companions he had, the ascetics, Shramana fellows like himself, had become completely disillusioned with him when he had that milk that was offered him, and when he renounced the path of extreme. Maybe he should have gone vegan, and they would have been cool with that. But they rejected him at that point. But he went back to them and gave a very famous sermon expounding on some of the fundamental principles, like the Four Noble Truths and dependent arising. I've written some of these ideas here: dependent arising, the Four Noble Truths, and so forth. And they became the first of his disciples. And for most of the rest of his life, he would travel around that part of North India, expounding on his on the truth as he was revealing it. And he founded an order. By the way, I don't know if you know these words, but Sangha, S-A-N-G-H-A, that means the...
Meherabad.
Meherabad. That's right, it's like Meherabad.
Again.
Would the Buddha have been so lucky, right, to have such a distinguished members of his Sangha. It's a monastic order. He actually founded a monastic order. Jesus did not, of course, and in the Quran, when the topic comes up, Allah says, Allah will often use we to refer to themselves. He'd say, that was their own idea. We never asked them to do that. That's what Allah had to say about monastic orders. Didn't prohibit it, but clearly said this is not necessary. But Buddha did found one. And a lot of early Buddhism is centered on them, and one of the major categories of early texts about Buddhism is, it's called the Vinaya. Those are texts about the rules of the monastic orders. Buddha did found orders of nuns also, in fact. He actually didn't want to, but got prevailed upon nonetheless. So it was his mother-in-law who won the case for them, as a matter of fact. She wanted to become a nun, and Ananda pleaded on her behalf, so Buddha did allow that. So this was, so a lot of his followers had renounced the world and had become monks, part of his Sangha. And there were also lay followers who became part of the larger movement around him. There are all sorts of various stories. From time to time he displayed miraculous powers according to the stories. There was a cousin of his who joined the order, who became his bitter enemy, Devadatta. That's part of his story. Devadatta tried to kill Buddha several times. I think he tried to roll a big boulder on him once, and had a mad elephant attack him, things like that. I think he wanted to the Sangha, the order, to be more ascetic. You see, that was a very strong impulse in those days. A sort of a disgust with the world and a desire to practice extreme asceticism. Our boomer generation has been delightfully free from ascetic tendencies until now. But at this age, it was very much there. And he tried to create a split with his order. So that conflict was another part of Buddha's life story. Yeah.
Were there any hints at all anywhere in this history about the 5 perfect masters of Buddha? No.
No. And I don't have any idea through whom he got realization.
I read somewhere that Baba mentioned
Is
the
there an old
woman
woman?
who gave him the milky rice,
Did she
was
say that he
played
was?
the role of Babajan.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's interesting.
Mm.
I think she was just a poor peasant woman, right?
Or
On the
on the
surface.
surface,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
No.
Yeah, I remember something
And
about
somebody asked Baba, what's her name?
Like Baba.
Baba said, oh, it's such a long time, I've forgotten.
Well, that would be very, it would intuitively make a lot of sense that person would have played such a role.
Because he had that milk before he went into the final,
Yeah, the final
before awakening.
renunciation. The Buddha, by the accounts that descend to us, lived to be the age of 80, and he was warning his followers that his time was near, and he had a meal given to him by a blacksmith, and got violently sick thereafter. And there's a lot of discussion as to whether, it doesn't seem that the blacksmith intended to poison him, but the food may have been food poisoning anyway. Although Buddha himself assured the guy that it wasn't his fault. So we can read a lot about that, whether the meal actually was responsible for his dying or not. But his final words were, work out your salvation with diligence, something like that. Of course, he didn't speak in English. By the way, we don't know exactly what language he did speak in. Pali is probably related to it. It would be, which is close to Sanskrit, some early form of Pali or Sanskrit, like that. So his final passing away, they give the name to that para-nirvana. That's after achieving nirvana, after you've lived your lifetime and give up your body, you pass away into para-nirvana. Now, in Baba's account of things, we have a nice, analytic discussion of that. That is, you pass away from the 10th state of God back to a nirvikalpa samadhi in the 8th state of God. But, of course, they didn't have that chart back in those days. And very soon after his death, there was a council. And in it, one of the main tasks was to preserve his teachings. Now, actually, when I was back in academia, my specialization was oral tradition, as a matter of fact. And one of the things that I came to see very clearly was in former ages, people's memories were much better than ours are now for the most part. They really did train their memories and could, you had to, without writing, the whole survival of your culture depended on your being able to remember what you had heard and be able to repeat it. So I don't treat this cynically. In fact, in the Vedic era, with things like the Rig Veda, an enormous effort was given to memorization of the Vedas and their very correct pronunciation. You had to pronounce the Vedas exactly correctly for them to have the proper ritual effect. So this was a big part of Indian civilization. So I personally think they probably did a good job of it, of preserving it. According to some of the stories, a lot of the first recitations were done by Ananda. Ananda was Buddha's his Erich, his Peter, his Ali, that role, who was his companion all the time. And so he recited a lot of what he had heard Buddha said. And so that was, even though writing existed at the time, it didn't have a high reputation. People didn't completely trust writing. So they actually memorized it for quite a while. And it was several hundred years before it got written down. I don't think anyone knows exactly when it did get written down. The great emperor Ashoka is his name. Have you heard of Ashoka?
Yeah.
He was in the 3rd century. He died 223 or something like that. Who became converted to Buddhism and played the role of spreading Buddhism very widely across the Indian subcontinent. Made an effort to find the scriptures at the time, so a lot of it had been written down by then anyway. We don't have anything from that period. The earliest Buddhist scriptures are much later, and a big factor actually is when the Muslims arrived in India in the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, they did so with very great violence. It was really, this is quite a destructive bunch. They really slaughtered huge numbers of people. And for some reason, they were particularly headed in for Buddhism. I don't entirely understand. Well, metaphysically, it doesn't make much sense because Buddhism doesn't affirm the existence of gods at all, whereas Hinduism has them all over the place. So why they would have been so angry at the Buddhists, but I don't suppose that they were particularly thoughtful or philosophical in their killing.
I read somewhere that they regarded the Buddhists as idol worshippers.
Right.
Because by that time with Mahayana Buddhism,
Right.
lots of images. And
There were images everywhere, yeah. And Vajrayana also was there, but which is Tantric Buddhism, which had all kinds of mandalas and all that kind of thing. So they probably saw it as a particularly egregious violation of, Tawhid. Anyway, there were great Buddhist universities in North India by then. Nalanda was one of the most famous, and with huge libraries and lots of monks, and they completely destroyed them. So most of the Sanskrit texts were destroyed by them, actually. And one of the reasons that the Buddhist scriptures that have descended from the earliest ones intact are in Pali is that the Muslims did not get to Sri Lanka. And it so happens that the kind of Buddhism that did get to Sri Lanka used the Pali texts. So those survived, and a lot of the Sanskrit ones were destroyed. Also, there was an enormous labor of translation into Chinese, as Tian would know. There are some great translators, Kumara Jiva and Xuanzang. How do you say his name? Xuanzang.
What
yeah.
century was that?
in the
Seventh.
Tang Dynasty, yes,
7th
7th
century.
to the 8th and
From the
9th.
Pali.
No, from Sanskrit. So the Mahayana Buddhist, including some earlier Buddhist texts, were preserved in Chinese and some in Tibetan.
Yeah, so a lot of what is lost can be recovered from Chinese translation. There's an improbable story, isn't it?
The emperor supported Buddhism. There's a translation team of 400.
With Xuanzang, right?
Yeah, in the
Xuanzang.
emperor's court.
You know Monkey, the novel Monkey? Some of you might have read that. That's about Xuanzang, actually.
And when did Buddhism make its way across to China?
Well,
1st and 2nd century.
yeah, the earliest record is the Buddhist monk came to China about the 1st century.
Bodhidharma is the first I know of.
No, he was
before
later.
him?
He was later.
Isaac.
He met the Han emperor about the year 21 or something.
Yeah.
The emperor had a dream. And then the next day he told his ministers, I had a dream, this golden person. One wise one said, oh, he's the Buddha. So the emperor sent people to India to get Buddhist scriptures. Right? when Jesus was here, really in the very beginning.
So this is like 500 years after Buddha.
Yeah.
And you know, I mentioned, I read in preparation for this, Ashva, it's the earliest extended biography of Buddha. Jeff gave it to me. Ashvagosha's Buddha Karida, it's called, the 1st or 2nd century. It's poetic. He's often regarded as the greatest Sanskrit poet for Kalidasa. But actually, half of it is lost. But it's preserved only in Chinese translation. So the Chinese translations play a big role in the recovery of Buddhist doctrine. You know, Buddhist, it wasn't, we're talking here about Buddha himself and his life, but a lot of the really major Buddhist sutras date from a much later period, the Mahayana period. A lot of them, according to the Mahayana count, were delivered by Buddha and preserved in the Tushita heaven. And they were found there and brought out. So if you want to come up with some nice discourse of Babas, and it's not to be found anywhere, you can say, well, I just took a dip into the Tushita heaven.
Maybe that's where the book is.
That's where the book is. Okay. Yeah.
That's where Maitreya Buddha is supposed to teach. You know,
In the
like
Tushita
Ashoka
heaven.
and Vasu Buddha, the Yoga, Yogacara.
Well, since the Maitreya Buddha is Baba, that must be where he did stow the book. Hey, has anybody got a key?
Wasn't there a lot of the scriptures found up in Tibet, or they were translated?
They were translated. We'll go next week a little bit into that story, though I hope that other people can help me out with it. I don't really know a whole lot about it. I'll basically go up to the very beginnings of, it's called the Vajrayana Buddhism, or Tantric Buddhism, and that's the kind that wound up coming into Tibet much later, like the 8th century, 9th century. So there's some about the life of Buddha. Anyone else want to questions or comments about his life?
I have a story which I found very touching. Towards the end of the Buddha, among other things, one of his last instructions to his disciples was to boycott his charioteer, China, his name was. Because this man, his driver, took him out of the palace to become ascetic. He became very arrogant, very proud of his early association with the Buddha. He caused a bit of a trouble. So Buddha said nobody is to speak to him, to advise him, or anything, just totally boycott him. So Ananda went to this charioteer, China, to tell him about Buddha's final instruction. Then he felt so ashamed that he decided to change, to mend his way. And then he did. Of course, immediately the whole community took him back. And he became an arahant. He became enlightened.
Yeah, in Buddha's life story, there are many beautiful stories of how he would deal with people, compassion, his ways, his compassionate ways. Yeah.
Just going back to the dates, Ward, which you said are pretty vague, but 400 BC to 400 AD is more than pretty vague. That's major.
No, it doesn't go to 400 AD. They would
you had 400 C, which is was that 400 Christian era or what?
Well, I must be mistaken. It should be BCE, before the Christian era. That's the latest datings. Would have him dying 400.
So it was all within.
Sometimes you'll see 600 to 300. I don't know how they get to 300 out of 400 for the Christian era.
It's normally like about 400 BC. That's where Lao Tzu, Confucius, also the Platonic tradition is a big whatever they call the world access.
Yeah.
The real culture
Axial
access
age,
time.
Well,
And all of the world.
Alexander the Great, too.
Yeah, the avatars,
So what happened?
when the avatar comes, he brings with him all these awakenings in different parts of the world.
If anyone should, wonder, Baba said 700 to 1400 years, and if he died 400, that doesn't seem to work very well. A couple things about that. One is that that number probably is a generalized truth of the periodicity of the avatar, which extends back for billions of years. And it does appear to me that those three, I think Francis says that the Advents were clumped closely, some such phrase. Buddhism seems to have been destined to send its influence to the north and east, mostly, China, Japan, Southeast Asia, and it died out of India. Christianity sent its influence out to the west, and Islam stayed in the middle. So it may have been three closely, chronologically close advents as part of a plan of reaching the world in different directions, which would then converge in Baba's advent. I personally think that's probably the case.
It's a long time ago. The dates,
And
very
the other,
airy-fairy, isn't it?
like with Jesus, the date is pretty solid.
Yeah,
because the Romans had
Yeah.
real histories.
Sure.
And with Muhammad, it's pretty solid too.
Yeah.
But these dates in Buddha, I don't have any faith in at all. Like they'll say that Zoroaster was 600 BC.
Yeah.
When you get back to that period, the evidence is just so sparse
Yeah.
that who knows, it may turn out to have been way before that.
Yeah.
That's what
Sure.
I personally think.
I feel Baba, later he says 700 years. In the earlier days, like
Said
in Lord
450.
Mayor, he would say 500, sometimes he even say 400. So Baba
Okay.
himself, and also he doesn't like
Yeah.
mathematics.
He wasn't good at math, he said.
Not very good.
You think
I
that
was
might
going
be
to say
Bowles
that, but I didn't.
translation?
Could be.
Oh, yours? Oh, well, you know what these
Yeah.
Chinese are like.
I was a bit struck that the academic area that you're working in was the oral tradition. And that sort of unfolded to notice that how long the oral tradition continued in culture.
Yeah.
And without it, even the troubadours who were the Facebook of the day,
Yeah, and it had a impact even when literacy came in. I studied this in the classical and medieval and Renaissance tradition. And training of memory was one of the most important parts of education. They really did that. It's not just true in the West, it's true in, I know in the Middle East and in India also. For example, the Hafiz means someone who's memorized the Quran. Well, people did that all the time back in those days. And there are all these techniques. I read some of these manuals for training your memory, like you would visualize like some public place, like a public building. It was a big deal in those days. And the things you want to remember, you place on it, for example, stuff like that. I remember Bao had all these memory tricks he would use. So it's kind of lost in the modern age. But I personally think they probably did a very good job of preserving what they got from Buddha.
At that time, I think they have really good memory. Like Ananda is known for having the most accurate and excellent memory of
Just
the
like
10
Erich did.
of the 10 main disciples of the Buddha. Like mind you, some other people for wisdom, some for other things. But Ananda really has excellent memory.
And I read a few years ago, I don't know if you have it here, the Encyclopedia of Indian Philosophy by Karl Potter. You have some volumes here.
We have one volume on the shelves.
Abhidhamma.
The rest are in the computers in the library.
I found it to be really excellent, but when he was going over some of the stuff of Buddhist scripture, he noted that a number of the schools preserved in their collections of Buddhist scriptures some sutras that said things that were quite antithetical to what their doctrines were, which would suggest that they really weren't revising, even if they didn't like it. So I think there was a sense of fidelity that probably preserved a lot of it very well. Of course, once you get into the Mahayana era, all the game is completely changed, which we'll get to next time. But meanwhile, here are some of the major ideas of early Buddhism, and most of these seem to be attributable to Buddha himself. It's very likely that the developed forms in which we get them were in fact developed over time. That could be. There's no way of sorting that out now. So I'm not going to try to, of course, but I'll give some of the major, really huge doctrines of early Buddhism. This is, of course, one, the Middle Way. Here's another really big one is the Four Noble Truths. I'm going to read what you may know this guy. One of his books is a basic introduction to Buddhism. A lot of people have read. The heart of the Buddha's teaching lies in the Four Noble Truths, Katari Ariyaksakani, which he expounded in his very first sermon to his old colleagues, the five ascetics, at Isipatana, modern Sarnath. That's up again in North India, the place where Baba went in the new life, near Benares. In this sermon, as we have it in the original texts, these four truths are given briefly. But there are innumerable places in the early Buddhist scriptures where they are explained again and again with greater detail and in different ways. If we study the Four Noble Truths with the help of these references and explanations, we get a fairly good and accurate account of the essential teachings of the Buddha, according to the original texts. So if you understand the Four Noble Truths, you've really got a big core of early Buddhism.
Do you remember one of Baba? Baba basically the same, isn't it? Evolution, reincarnation, involution. Baba does the same again and again. He repeats the similar thing. Divine theme.
In other words, his core theme, like the divine theme, appears to me to have been the core philosophical theme that Baba gave in this age. It looks like it to me. Similarly, the Four Noble Truths was the core of Buddha. And let me just note these things about it. Buddha, I'll read a great parable about this later, but Buddha was fundamentally non-metaphysical. You know, metaphysics is our ontology, a study of first principles, a study of what really and truly exists, things like that, or theological. He really didn't have much to say about. In fact, he did have something to say about that. He said he wouldn't say. When he was asked, he said, I'm not going to talk about these things. Buddha's teaching, I hate this word, so with scare quotes around it, is in that sense secular. But it's not secular in the modern sense, but it doesn't posit an existence of a God. It's not concerned with existence, or in the early Upanishads were in existence by then. They would say that Atman is one with Brahman. You remember that? The soul is identical with God. Buddha wouldn't go there. He wouldn't ask those questions. Where he did go was to the problem of suffering. In fact, I'm going to read this right now because this is so good.
I think some people refer to the Buddha's teaching as realistic rather than secular.
Okay, realistic in that way. Of course, the word realistic can mean lots of things too. But here's a great explanation of this, the whole character of his teaching, the parable of the poisoned arrow. The sutta begins at Jetavana, where the monk Malunkaputa is troubled by Gautama Buddha's silence on the 14 unanswerable questions, which include queries about the nature of the cosmos and life after the death of a Buddha. Malunkyaputta then meets with Gautama Buddha and asks him for the answers to these questions. He says that if he fails to respond, Malunkyaputta will renounce his teachings. Gautama responds by first stating that he never promised to reveal ultimate metaphysical truths such as those, and then uses the story of a man who has been shot with a poisoned arrow to illustrate that those questions are irrelevant to his teaching. So here's the parable. It's just as if a man were wounded with an arrow, thickly smeared with poison. His friends and companions, kinsmen and relatives would provide him with a surgeon, and the man would say, "I won't have this arrow removed until I know whether the man who wounded me was a noble warrior, a priest, a merchant, or a worker." He would say, "I won't have this arrow removed until I know the given name and clan name of the man who wounded me, until I know whether he was tall, medium, or short, until I know whether he is dark, ruddy brown, or golden colored, until I know his home village, town, or city, until I know whether the bow with which I was wounded was a long bow or a crossbow, until I know whether the bowstring with which I was wounded was fiber, bamboo threads, sinew, hemp, or bark, until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was wild or cultivated, until I know whether the feathers of the shaft with which I was wounded were those of a vulture, a stork, hawk, a peacock, or another bird, until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was bound with the sinew of an ox, a water buffalo, a langur. What is a langur?
Langur is a type of monkey.
Or a monkey.
They come to Meherabad occasionally.
I see. He would say, "I won't have this arrow removed until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was that of a common arrow, a curved arrow, a barbed, a calf-toothed, or an oleander arrow." The man would die, and those things would still remain unknown to him. It's a great answer, isn't it? In other words, these questions are not relevant to the problem of suffering. And Buddha was saying, my task is to give an answer to the problem of suffering. And he wouldn't get distracted into these other questions. So in that sense, Buddhism is, again, our English words are not adequate, but therapeutic in the higher sense. It's not philosophical. And that starting point really influences everything in Buddhism after that. Even later Buddhism did get into metaphysical questions more, but it's always from, let's say, a phenomenological point of view. That is, it's looking at human experience, the things that we experience and that cause us to be bound, or that we get bound up with, and that precipitate in us suffering, and how to provide a solution to that. That's consistently this starting point and angle of vision that Buddhism always brings to it. So Buddha was quite different than the other avatars in this respect, who posited metaphysical entities always, like with Meherabad, we get all kinds of stuff there about that. I don't want to go into Baba now, but in Jesus there's, God the Father, Muhammad, there's Allah, there are all sorts of existence and principles and that are part of the account. Not with Buddha.
So it was more the medical model.
But yeah, in a way it was, a medical. He was a healer in that sense.
Somewhere else, I think Buddha also explained they are not profitable, or they're not fundamentally related to his teaching.
Yeah.
Those metaphysical things. Because he teaches based on the suffering and what people...
Yeah, how to deal with suffering. Now, I think that's part of the reason for Buddha's portability. I look at that, it crossed right over in the mountains into China. As different a civilization as one could imagine. nowadays it's very popular in the West, particularly among sort of intellectual sorts of people, many of whom are hostile to God or don't want to have stuff laid on them in that sense. But he's talking about suffering, which everybody experiences. And so it's quite a unique teaching among the different avatars, it seems to me. Actually, this is when I first heard of Buddha, this blew my mind. Of course, back in those days, you couldn't go through a full day without having your mind blown about 5 times by one thing or another. That was the 60s or early 70s. But this really did. I had never encountered anything like this before. The Four Noble Truths. The first is the truth of Dukkha, it's called. And Dukkha is sometimes translated as suffering, but that's not quite adequate to what the word means. It's sometimes said, Buddha said that life is suffering, but it's not just that we're miserable all the time, it's that whatever you're experiencing, it's not ultimately satisfying. Even if you're happy, even if you have a pleasure, you have a nice ice cream cone or a nice mango or whatever it may be, it doesn't satisfy in the course of time. That's kind of what it means. The truth of dukkha is that all conditional phenomena and experiences are not ultimately satisfying. So you might say this is, I don't know what you call it, a diagnosis of the basic condition. And the next would be the etiology of the condition. This is the key step. At least when I first encountered this as a kid, I said, I've never thought of this before, and this must be true. The truth of the origin of dukkha in desire. The cause of suffering is desire. And the Pali word tanha, or the Sanskrit word trishna, means thirst, craving. Desiring is an effect of craving. And when I first ran across this, it's obviously true. If you didn't want anything, you wouldn't suffer. And if you want things, you must suffer. That's the key starting point of Buddhism, I would say. Is that craving for and clinging to what is pleasurable and aversion to what is not pleasurable. See, that's desire too, negative desire, result in becoming, rebirth, dissatisfaction, and re-death, dying again. You get born again and you die again. That's the second noble truth, the cause of it. Now, the truth of the cessation, naroda is the Pali word, of dukkha, or suffering or dissatisfaction, is that putting an end to this craving and clinging also means that rebirth, dissatisfaction, and re-death can no longer arise. And the fourth, so if you annihilate desire, you annihilate suffering. I didn't mention, there are certain metaphysical premises in Buddhism. One is reincarnation. He does assume that death leads to rebirth. And the word for that is samsara. Do you know the word samsara? It's the ocean of the world with its endless cycle of birth and death. He does take that as a...
It was an accepted thing at
It
the
was
time.
universally accepted in that environment by all the hip shramanas, and actually by probably a lot of the Vedantic people in that period also. It had kind of come to prevail in India. So that he took. Also, a basic concept of karma was part of the implicit understanding of Buddhism. So, and then the last of these, the truth of the path of liberation from dukkha, is that by following the Noble Eightfold Path, an end can be put to craving, to clinging, to becoming. See, becoming, becoming is you desire something, so it leads to your becoming it. And that leads to the death, and that leads to rebirth. Becoming, bhava is the word, is an important word in early Buddhism. To dissatisfaction and to re-death. So the first noble truth is that everything is conditioned by dukkha, suffering or dissatisfaction. The second is there is a cause to suffering, which lies in craving. The third is if you eliminate desire, craving, you eliminate suffering and the samsara. And the fourth is the method of doing this is the Eightfold Path. So it's actually very simple. Very simple. This is really the core. There's actually another big core concept that I'll get to in a minute. And so like there's in later Buddhist analysis, it's not clear how much of this, I'm sure Buddha explained all kinds of stuff during his lifetime, just like Baba did. But suffering, like they would do in now 3 kinds of it. Like one kind, the actual feeling of physical or mental pain or anguish, response to unpleasant physical or mental experiences. Another kind is the suffering produced by all conditioned phenomena, craving for things to be how we want them to be. It is a basic unsatisfactoriness pervading all forms of existence, due to ignorance of the fact that all forms of life are changing. I mean, this is the basic condition of our life is not satisfying. I mean, don't you find that to be true? Because I do. There's always something that's, even when you get what you want, turns out
an itch to scratch.
Yeah, there's an itch to scratch. And then when you get it, it doesn't do the trick. It never does. And if you don't get it, well, that's a cause of suffering too. So this is this is a deeper kind of suffering, not just the suffering of somebody, I got pricked with a thorn or something like that. And so forth. I won't go over all of these. But anyway, there's a lot of deep thought into what these different noble truths mean. This is the first noble truth, a deeper analysis of that. Then 3 kinds of craving, 3 kinds of emotional poisons or kleshas. By the way, this is a big word in Buddhism. A klesha is a taint or I guess you could
defilement.
Use a defilement, something like that. The Christian equivalent would be something like sin, but it doesn't have guilt associations exactly. It's a product of ignorance. But the 3 kinds of kleshas, the core, these are worth going over, is ignorance. This is a big idea in Buddhism. All of it derives from a fundamental ignorance of the truth of things, which leads to attachment and aversion, right? You can see that those are 2 sides of the same coin. If you're attached to something, you're going to be afraid of something else. Let's see if there's more on the Four Noble Truths. So this is the 4 Noble Truths in brief. Any comments or questions about this? Really, if you get this, you've got the core of Buddhist teachings.
Are these the 3 noble poisons?
3 noble poisons.
Yeah. You joke.
Baba does in Infinite Intelligence have a big thing on poisoning. Poisoning the baby. There's a big section on poisoning the baby.
Yes, for ignorance is knowledge, for attachment is detachment, for aversion
is the enjoyment of suffering. How about that?
Is passion. Yeah.
Yeah,
Enjoyment of suffering, that's good.
There we go. Yeah. Now, here is the Eightfold Path. So, right view, that means right understanding, the right framework of understanding, right intention, which is the right motivation impelling your action. So these would belong, all right, I'll say there are 3 fundamental types. There's wisdom, there's ethical conduct, and then there's concentration, because a lot of early Buddhism was put into practice through meditation in one form or another. So the first 2 are basic wisdom leading into experience, then right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Those are 3 those middle three. The term for that is sila, which means something like ethical conduct. So there's wisdom, prajna, there's ethical conduct, then there's right effort, right mindfulness. That word has become a real big one nowadays. I think coming from Buddhism probably, but now it's all over the place in the West, and all kinds of therapies and stuff. And right concentration. So these are the 8, I don't know, it's not like you would do them in sequence. The 8 are always involved in the course of one's life.
So there are no Buddhist politicians then?
It would seem to be so.
Dharma is above it. How would you correlate that to Baba's teaching?
Let's wait on that till we come to the end.
Sure.
Where those questions come up. I have okay, I'm just going to right view, right thought, and then the 3 on the path of virtue, sila, right speech, right action, right living, right effort.
It's like the Zoroastrian thing, isn't it?
Good thoughts, good words.
Good words, good deeds.
Yeah,
Yes.
It is related to that. It doesn't have good words though. That wasn't
Right speech.
Hmm?
Right speech.
Right speech. What is it? It has right speech, right action, good thoughts, good words. It doesn't have good thoughts there. It has right
view.
intention, right view.
Intention. Yes.
Mm.
So those are there in that sense. Then, now these 3 are, in the readings I've done, usually connected with like meditational practice, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. They're the path of concentration. That's what they're linked with. This organization of those 8 into those 3 categories is pretty conventional. You'll see that everywhere. And now, so there's a huge central idea in Buddhism. Here's another one. I wrote it up here. Pratitya samutpada, or dependent arising. I know it's a mouthful. These Sanskrit words are like that. Pratitya samutpada. What pratitya means is to meet or to rely, and samutpada means to arise. Now this, Buddha sometimes said that this is sometimes characterized as along the very core understanding that Buddha gives. Buddha himself said it's very difficult, it's very hard to understand. And I don't know of another avatar who ever tried to explain this. It seems to be unique to Buddhism as far as, I'm sure some of the great philosophers will come to similar ideas. But as to the avatars themselves, Buddha is the only one I know of. The idea is that everything in its very arising is always already dependent on something else. Dependency is the innate condition of existence in the world. Even if you have the very first thing that ever happened, the moment it comes into being, it's already dependent on something else, right? Here's some formula. Here's one analogy. Some of this is sometimes given as 3 sticks leaning against each other. You remove one, they fall. Any phenomenon, any existent thing is like that. It always is dependent on something, and if you remove that on which it's dependent, it ceases to exist. In a way, you could call this like, it implies causation. Everything has a cause. But it's more than that. It's the very nature of reality. In fact, the Mahayanas, Nagarjuna, developed this a lot. In the very nature of things, nothing actually stands on its own feet. it's always has an implied dependency on other things. So here's a formulation of it. It seems very simple, but this is because that is. This is not because that is not. This ceases to be because that ceases to be. I'll read that again. This is because that is. This is not because that is not. This ceases to be because that ceases to be. Now, where Buddha took this was in an examination of life experience, that everything that you encounter is already dependent on something else. And the most famous, here I'll read a few more things about this, dependent origination. Pratitya, again, that means meeting or relying or depending, and samutpada means arising. Everything that arises does so through a meeting and interdependence of things. The view that no phenomenon exists or comes about without depending on other phenomena or conditions around it. In English, it's also called conditioned genesis, dependent co-arising, interdependent arising, and so forth. I'll read this. This is a good dictionary of early Indian terms. Literally, this being given, that follows. It is the central doctrine of the Buddha upon which his other teachings are based. It explains the causes of suffering, both relatively and absolutely. It is comprised, and here's another big idea associated with this, with the 12 links, or nidanas, the 12 nidanas. I'll be saying more about them, which perpetuate the wheel of causation. You see, we're going to get to the Buddhist wheel now, through this doctrine of pratitya samutpada. Those links which are due to one's past, okay, I'll just read this and we're going to go over this more. These are the 12 links. Those links which are due to one's past life are ignorance, avidya, and predispositions, samskara. This is actually the Sanskrit form of sanskara, which Baba talked so much about. Those links which are due to one's present life are consciousness, vijnana, name and form, namarupa, the 6 fields or 5 sense organs in mind. They always say there's 6 senses. Those are the 5 senses plus the mind. Everywhere in Indian psychology, the mind is considered one of them. Along with their objects, sadayatana, sense object contact, sparsa, feeling, vedana, craving, tanha, and attachment, udadana. Those links which are due to one's future life are coming to be, bhava, rebirth, jati, and old age and death, jara marana. From each, and so okay, I'm going to show you a wheel, and we'll go over this again and help explain this more. But the point is, each of these leads inexorably, ineluctably to the next. Thus, they have, each of these 12 has 4 characteristics: objectivity, necessity, invariability, and conditionality. That is, they are objectively real as part of our experience, whether we know it or not. There is a necessary relation between each and the next. One invariably follows from the predecessor and leads to the next one of them. And everything is conditional. Again, everything is dependent. Nothing stands alone. Here's another version of these. So these are the 12 nidanas, but here's the wheel. I ripped this off from the internet somewhere. You'll see a lot of talk. I have the impression that in a lot of the Buddhism now, this really gets explained in great depth. Does anybody happen to know? Because I listened to 1 or 2 talks in the YouTube, and they were very well informed, and I really learned a lot about it. Anyway, so these are the 12 nidanas. It begins, by the way, this is a characteristic of Buddhism. It's a characteristic of Vedanta also, where the root problem is not, like in the original sin doctrine of Christianity, the root problem is understood in ethical terms as a failure of the will, that is sin. But in Buddhism, it's characterized in terms of knowledge. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge. And in Vedanta, that is the case also. It seems that in South Asia, there's a pervasive, the starting point usually was in the area of knowledge, not in the area of the will. So the first thing is ignorance. Ignorance, this is klesha words used, this precipitates in the arising of samsara, karmic formations. I would love it if someday some Baba lover would really delve into this thing of samskaras, because I'm never really sure whether the word is being used in the same way that Baba did. I've come to think that it probably is in the main part. So out of ignorance, samskaras are precipitated. And now a lot of this, by the way, was developed in this form much later by Buddha Gosa in the 5th century AD. Much later, but it doubtless has its basic roots in the teaching of the Buddha. Anyway, Buddha Gosa explained, this is the legacy of your past life, this is your present life, and this is the future life that is precipitated, right? You see the logic of that? The past determines the present, and the present determines the future. And the goddamn wheel spins on and on and on and never stops. I think actually this is one of the things to bring into our Baba culture would be really worth doing, because this really gives an analysis that I've never seen the like of it. There's a wonderful line of Francis says, I think in Cantos of Wandering, where he says, about the wheel, the merry-go-round is not so merry when you start to realize that it keeps going round. That's the wheel of the law. So this, you see the wheel, you see how the concept of the wheel of the law is a consequence of dependent arising? You see that? Each thing is already presupposing the next thing and presupposing the thing that came before it. And you're never free from that. Now, isn't that true?
Also say broke the spokes of the wheel?
That's right. He's referring to this. Break the wheel's hub, which is conditioned mind. That's exactly what Francis knew all this stuff. He's very well informed. But isn't this really a true analysis of our experience? It is for me. Everything always, if I look into it, every moment's experience depends on something that happened before, and it always precipitates a consequence. And there's no getting out of it. You see, that's what that's the application of dependent arising to human experience in the form of this wheel of causation.
Well, once you're reincarnated, you're out of it. That's what I'm waiting for.
Or you're back into it.
Yeah, exactly.
This is your next this is your next life. And where does this lead? Leads to there.
Well, that's why we came to the chalkboard.
No, I can help you get more entangled in the wheel.
I'm sure.
Maybe I'm a wheeler dealer.
We're going to build a revolving door.
Right.
That's how you approach the abode, go through the revolving door.
That's right.
So I meant when God realized, not reincarnated.
That's right, when you break it.
Wrong word.
Yeah, that's right. And you know what Buddha's word corresponding to that is nirvana, which means annihilation or extinction or blowing out. Because Buddha never affirmed the existence of God. Actually, Baba said that was his mistake. I don't, what I've read, I've never quite seen that he denied the existence of God either. He simply wouldn't go there.
Right.
But he did talk about annihilation or extinction, and you can see what that would be. We saw, because this exists, that exists. When this ceases to be, that ceases to be. Ceasing to be is the focus of Buddhism, of Buddha's early teachings. So this is all the legacy of the past. Ignorance precipitates sanskaras, and what that does is it precipitates consciousness. For say, you wake up at the beginning of conditioned consciousness, and this whole big blue section here is all the present life. Or, in the way people explain it nowadays, you could apply this even to every single moment of consciousness. One of the great early Buddhists, Vasubandhu, made this connection also. You can apply it on the level of a lifetime, or you could apply it to each instance originating and perishing and giving rise to the next moment. This is related to an important doctrine we'll get to in a minute. But so consciousness arises, and consciousness immediately associates with, it's called nama rupa, name and form. And the Buddhists give a lot of analysis. Name means your sensory perceptions. It means your identification of who you are, and all those things. And that is all associated with a particular form. And this, in other words, I'm Ward, I'm this person, not that, I'm David, I'm Di. I'm not Roz, for heaven's sakes. I'm not Pat, like that. You associate with a particular name and form. And having your consciousness having done so, it immediately starts to experience through the 6 senses. And once again, that's the 5 senses that we usually know, plus mind. The mind that, that aspect, manas, the aspect of mind that coordinates the senses and integrates them. So you see the connection? I mean, this actually makes a great deal of sense. Sanskaras precipitate basic consciousness, which immediately identifies with name and form, which immediately starts to experience the world through the 6 senses. Having done so, the next stage is sparsa, which means contact. Like, you wake up, all right, I had coffee this morning. No one made it for me, but let's suppose someone did. Wake up and immediately I can smell the coffee, right, to the senses, and then I see the coffee, and then I touch the coffee cup. Then I make contact with it. I start to drink it, right? That leads inexorably to a feeling, whatever it may be. Oh, I burnt my tongue, or, oh, it tastes good, or that tastes horrible. And then all of these, I want to say, in later Buddhism, was developed, it was analyzed enormously. There are all these different categories. Abhidharma is the first formulation of all of this, about 2 centuries after Buddha. And that gives rise to a feeling. Now, the way that this particular chart in this particular lecture explained it, which I like a great deal. I don't know whether this comes from early Buddhism or not, but what they said was, this is the gap, the point of freedom, the way out of samsara. Do you go on from this to that, or do you not? That is, you've had a feeling and a sensation. All of this follows inexorably and unstoppably from the past, from your original ignorance and sanskaras. You're going to go this far. But do you take the next step? Do you own it? It's like, I want it, I gotta have it. Thirst, craving. Do you let that step be made? And if you can step out of it, this is the point at which you can do it. That makes a great deal of sense to me, anyway. I can't help all the feelings that arise, but do I own them and accept them and say, I desire, I want?
So if we take the wheel, the idea that it's not just the lifetime, but that it's also happening all the time,
Right.
so that point of escape is always there.
That's right.
It's always,
That's how I would understand it, yeah.
But
It's
how
a
do you
point
get
of
back in
choice.
again to continue what you have to do?
no,
What
once
to-
you're out, you're done.
If
So
you
that
could,
would be
if you could really and truly do this, absolutely, it would be out. I would presume this applies to every little samskara and every little desire.
So that would be realization then.
That would be nirvana.
Nirvana.
Ultimately, if you could
Right.
really do that, really escape.
So that point of freedom, would you say that's where, when Baba talks about neti, the jnana yoga, and also the earlier when Baba talked the karma
Yeah.
yoga, you don't react.
Yeah, that's right.
The point where Baba.
Detachment, renunciation. I have this craving to do this. I am not this. I dissociate. I let go. And at that point, you're out of it before you. I mean, I take thirst, tarshna, tanha to mean I want it. In other words, I have accepted that I desire. And, and once I've accepted I desire, I'm done for. Yeah.
Speaking of thirst, would you like a cup of water?
I'm going to renounce it.
Can I have that in writing?
Well, but don't suppress it.
There we go. Oh God, you're introducing complexities. This would be like aversion, the third of those three forms of desire we saw earlier.
So later when Baba says to give everything to him, to give it, do you feel
Right.
that also posits there?
Yeah, I would think all acts of the conscious will of the spiritual sort, this seems to be the place where they would happen. Don't you agree? Yeah. Because you have to become conscious of it. It's, the consciousness has to arise to the point where you've had a feeling and then you're aware of it. How can you act before that? But then you do have to act. As soon as you have embraced the desire, the rest is going to follow, and you can't really get out of it again. Yeah,
If you step out there,
yeah.
are you still in a body?
Well,
How do you live the rest of your life if you're not? If you are still in a body?
yeah. I mean, you probably should talk to a good lama on a lot of these questions, but I am presuming that this is a very deep and fundamental analysis of bondage and how it works. So if that happens with respect to one particular desire, well, then that one maybe has been killed, but there are a zillion other desires. There are a zillion wheels spinning at the same time. I presume
so
it.
you don't have just one chance to...
I mean, I presume so. You've got to deal with all of the whole vast body of desire.
Well, I was sort of thinking that's what that meant when you were stepping out. But
Well, I mean, I suppose if this is looked at as a single lifetime, if you're maybe Buddha, he's under the Bodhi tree, he does the whole kit, deals with the whole thing right then. I'm sure it happens on that scale too.
Probably.
A lot of these questions, there be Buddhists who have really, are immersed in the tradition and could really speak a lot more to it. I just read a little bit about it. Yeah.
I would imagine that line there is the point where you can read the stories, what do you do before enlightenment? What does the acolyte do before enlightenment? Well, he carries water and he cleans rocks. What does he do after enlightenment? Well, he carries water, he cleans rocks. Or, whatever they do. So it's the point where actually nothing changes. But the mind that was driving the organism up till then has really
stopped.
Changed.
Right.
Changed
the craving and no longer drives.
Yeah, without all these reflections of I want, I don't want, I like, I don't like, gimme, don't gimme, all of that. It's just gone. You just carry water and polish rocks.
So that would be like Mother Teresa, people like that. Maybe.
Well, a
Still in
truly
body.
desireless existence.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately what this would have to mean is someone who's God realized.
I feel probably that means more than just an idea, just a mental, just a wisdom thing. That whole the red line encompasses all the yoga, all the spiritual path. That's where the practice of the spiritual path is. So it's a lifetime or many lifetimes of effort rather than just one idea, one thought.
Yeah, this is a very deep presentation of the whole motivational structure of the ego. It's not simply dealt with. So then once the thirst has been accepted, that leads to grasping, does it not? Isn't that what desire does? I've got to have it. Or if it's negative, I'm running away from it. I've got to avoid it. And that leads me ultimately to becoming, where you identify, like my cup of coffee. I grasp it and then I become it.
But there's usually some plan, like, you see a shirt that you might want, you sort of start planning out, well,
yeah, that's all.
You'll go, there's that sort of constructive process.
Yeah, that's part of this whole thing.
Maybe.
And this has completed the cycle of this lifetime, or if you will, this moment where you become. Once the becoming has been completed, then this is the projected next lifetime or next moment. It leads to a new birth and it leads to a new death. And with the death, then that leads to a new ignorance and a new arising of samskaras, and the whole cycle repeats.
What I suspect that it's so interdependent that the future part actually has an effect back this way.
I'm sure it's true. I think this is a very deep, profound analysis of how desire works in our consciousness. It's often said that this phase of becoming is related to these samskaras, actually. That the becoming here is the samskaras there, at that stage. Okay, there's a lot more, even I could say, I have a lot more notes, but I think this is quite an extraordinary analysis of a bondage. I've never seen anything quite to match it, actually. And I think this is one of the great gifts Buddha has given to the world, and I think to our Baba culture too.
I'm thinking back at that red line, that the lady in the front mentioned that Baba had some, give it to me, is what Baba said, for the point after the red line. I'm just wondering if that's kind of like, well, if you've got to the red line point, you're seeing all this stuff in your head's a load of rubbish, so you can practice. You can actually practice for the end stage by, my desires are actually for Baba. It's sort of like an apprenticeship period when you actually then decide, actually I can, the whole thing's just totally useless and I'll just move on without it. It's like an apprenticeship period.
Yeah.
With the help of of Baba and the giving up.
It makes me think maybe the job is to live on the red line. So every single moment.
The razor edge.
Whatever, the razor's edge. Whatever comes up, because things are always coming up.
Yeah.
And always to discriminate, I am not this, I give it to Baba, let it go, and not buying into, I want it.
Yeah. Where was Baba's Mananash fit into that?
Well, the Mananash would be what culminates from the total annihilation of the mind.
They call it dimension in the Buddhist thing. Dementia. Like, it's not dementia. Well, it's a similar thing. The mind is gone.
Well, the whole goal of Buddhism, I'll say falsely the first time, is the annihilation of the self. But it's actually not that. It's the realization that the self does not exist. In fact, let me bring up that doctrine right now. This is one of the there are 3 characteristics in Buddhism of all existent things. They're all impermanent. They're all afflicted with dukkha, with suffering or unsatisfactoriness. And here's the third one. They are all they have no self. Buddhism denied the self. Now there's a point on the surface where what he taught starkly contradicts Vedanta, and starkly contradicts what Baba said, because Baba said there is an Atma, which ultimately is identical with Paramatma. Vedanta says the same thing. Buddha certainly denied the Atma. So the name of this doctrine is Anatma. I don't find this is a great problem to reconcile this. He's talking about the false self there. And that, Baba has said the same thing, the ego self, the false ego self. In any case, the doctrine of impermanence and anatma and dependent arising led Buddhists, whether Buddha himself formulated this or not, they don't know, but very soon after, to a doctrine called momentariness, which is nothing continues from one moment to the next. That is to say, even our two Johns here and Jeff's, the three J's on that sofa, they don't really have a self. And any idea of a self is completely illusory. Moreover, that self does not continue from one instant to the next. Everything, there's no continuity. Nothing has a continuing existence. This is a very radical doctrine, as you can well imagine. And so the Buddhists all kinds of metaphysicians had to explain how is it that Roy appears to be there even though he appeared to be there 5 seconds ago, and you're going to tell me it's not the same person. Well, this Pratitya Samutpada would give a way of accounting for that. There's each thing projects its sequel, right? Each instant projects its sequel. So one moment gives rise to the next. So a metaphor which Buddhism would often use is like that of a stream. You know, there's a continuity there, but every jot is constantly moving. There's no the water of the stream is always different. In the same way, you know, Trish here appears to be the same person, but actually it's continuous. She's not, but the stream appears to have a continuity, even though the water is always changing. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. So the doctrine, this dependent arising, will give an explanation for that, because everything, each moment, if you look at this wheel as being a single moment, each moment gives rise to its sequel, inexorably, inevitably, unstoppably, and you can't break it, you can't get out of it. So that this is related to the Buddhist doctrine of no self. There.
I have a comment about the 3 marks of existence. The first two, impermanence and suffering, no problem. The third one, no self, is where all the arguments and things have been caused.
Yeah.
I had a look at the Pali.
Here they are, by the way,
yeah.
The 3 marks of existence.
The Pali originally is like a sabi, sankhara, anatta, which means something like all sanskaras are without atma, are without soul, or without self. Yeah. So Buddha is really talking about phenomenon. This illusory everything is not talking about the real everything. So in the third mark of existence.
Yeah.
So Buddha is not contradicting Baba at all in that.
I would say I agree that he doesn't actually contradict Baba, because he won't speak to that point.
Yeah. Because the third
it's like the thing of the arrow, you know, he's like, is there something that transcendently exists? Well, if you try to answer that question, you'll be dead before you get the answer.
Because that
he wouldn't go there.
Yeah, the no self means is referring to the phenomena, referring to conditioned things.
Well, it certainly refers to me too. It certainly applies that way. Because the very purpose of Buddhism is to destroy the illusion of that false self.
And
that's its very project.
It seems that the original Sanskrit, he used sanskaras. All sanskaras are without self.
Yeah, this is getting to, let's see, how much time we have left. This is getting to the Buddhist analysis of the self and Buddhist psychology, which gives us, let me see, let me just show this. This is a real quick tour of some of the big ideas here, right? Whoops. The 5 skandhas is what I'm looking for. Yeah, here we go. This is what the false self consists of in the Buddhist analysis. There are 5 collections, there are 5 aggregates that make up the appearance of a Glenda or of a David, when in fact there's nothing there. It's completely false. But there are these 5 heaps of things that are somehow associated with each other. And when you achieve nirvana, you realize that none of them existed at all, and that I never was. It's a complete illusion. So these are the 5 skandhas, they're called. Sometimes, by the way, when you go into Buddhism, you have to be not thrown off by, sometimes words are presented in Sanskrit form, sometimes Pali. So like samskara, you'll see it samskara because that's Sanskrit, whereas later Indian languages it's sanskara. And skandhas are often khandas, right? So don't be too flipped out by that. Anyway, this is, again, from the outermost to the innermost. The outermost is the form, the rupa. The next layer in is sensation, or vedana. The next layer in is cognition, samgya, the cognition of the thinking functions of the mind. The next layer in from that are mental formations, or samskaras. Again, I keep wondering, is this exactly the same usage as Baba's? I'm tending to think that it is close, anyway. And the innermost is consciousness, or vijnana. Now, all of this is actually very related to other early Indian schools of thought. I guess I've never given a thing here on the self in Baba's account and others, but in Vedanta and other early schools, they tended, and Samkhya, there are a bunch of early Indian schools, they would represent the self as concentric rings, the outermost being the form, the physical form, and the innermost in Vedantic accounts would be the Atma, or the actual real self. Well, Buddhism won't acknowledge that, so the innermost is consciousness. But this is a little bit different from consciousness in Vedanta. I don't know if they're remembering any of this, any of you who went to the session last year, but in Vedanta, consciousness is actually identical with Atma, the real self is consciousness. But Buddhism doesn't, at this stage, acknowledge anything like that. Consciousness is our conditioned consciousness, this flowing stream that we're constantly experiencing.
So consciousness would be like our soul, the one that goes through the whole thing and then becomes God realized.
Well, that's how Vedanta would characterize it, where consciousness is real. But this seems to be conditioned consciousness that is constantly changing and is not the same from one moment to the next. That's how Buddhism looks at it.
Your lives are different from one moment to the next, one life to the next.
Yeah, one instant to the next. So that's how Buddhism would see it. It would not admit that consciousness has any enduring quality.
That's
Does
because
Buddhism
false identities.
Does Buddhism?
Yes. It's a constant flow of false identities, and if you look to see what lies below them, there's nothing there. That's the Buddhist analysis. If you look to see what underlies appearances, the Buddhists have a word for this later on, shunyata, emptiness, nothingness. Nothing is there.
Yet it does posit a witness to the emptiness.
But even the witness, I don't think they'll even admit the reality of the witness.
Does Buddhism say that you reincarnate?
Oh, yeah.
Do they believe? Okay.
No, so it's a huge question. If there's no self, how does that happen?
Yeah.
What is it that reincarnates? It's this collection, these 5 heaps. We call ourselves the heap.
And what
The
does
heap
that
kind
one, what do all 5 heaps make?
They don't make anything. There's nothing there. So when you attain nirvana, you realize none of it was real. None of it existed.
What a waste of energy.
Buddhism is very negational in that sense. It doesn't have a positive affirmation there. It does not, the I am God part was not said by Buddha.
Maybe that's why he didn't believe he was. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Buddha has the different turnings of the wheel depending on
Right.
the audience. So in the early turnings
We're on the
of
first
wheel,
one. We're on the first one here.
So that idea of self changes.
Yeah, it does. It does. When you get Mahayana, you get Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature. Yogacara has a different idea of consciousness there. I'm on the very early stuff right now.
And also the third turning then is the idea of the ultimate reality and reality. And so the ultimate reality, there is nothing, and in reality, you know, this hurts and I'm hungry and I'll be going to bed tonight. So all that sort of human day-to-day stuff still happens, but there's the ultimate reality, which is very different, which has none of this cognitive kind of, you know, emotional overlays and feelings, scandals, all those things.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning, Buddhism underwent a really enormous change. And this is one of the respects where the nature, self, the nature of Buddha, a lot of these things, well, I'll just say they changed a huge amount. Again, I'm not a great expert on all of this. I've tried to read what I could. But in the very earliest Buddhist formulations, there's no indication of any affirmation here. Nonetheless, Buddha, who had achieved nirvana, who had managed to, again, when we say annihilation of the false self, or annihilation of self, what that actually means is the realization that the self never existed. It's not that you annihilate anything, nothing was ever there. But even though he had done that, he was still walking around. He walked and he talked, you know, and he preached. And so apparently there can be some kind of a continued human existence, even for people who have achieved.
I think in early Buddhism, consciousness is often used with the indriyas, with the 5 senses, like eye conscious, smell.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's used on its own. Like
We don't have pure consciousness there. A pure unconditioned consciousness is not admitted as a possibility into the picture. Now here's another big idea of Buddhism, early Buddhism, and it's called the 3 jewels, the 3 ratna. Now we're coming really to how one, what is the path that one can follow to escape from this condition of bondage that the wheel has illustrated. These are the taking refuge. I take refuge in these 3. Taking refuge in the 3 jewels is central to Buddhist lay and monastic ordination. Even from the beginning, there were lay followers. You know, lay means people who don't belong to the monastic orders. As originated by Gautama, the Buddha, according to scriptures, taking refuge in the 3 jewels is generally considered to make one officially a Buddhist. You know, like in Islam, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is a prophet. There's some who would say, if I say that sincerely, I'm a Muslim. So this would be a similar kind of profession. Thus, in many Mahayana and Theravada Buddhist communities, the respective Sanskrit and Pali chant, the Vadana Tisarana is often recited by both monks and lay people. And here it is. Here are the three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Buddha is the actual Buddha himself, the person of the Buddha. The Dharma is the truth that he expounded, his teaching. And the Sangha is the community, the monastic community. You know, Don Stevens a number of years ago was talking about the three bridges. And I always thought that they were quite, they're a variant on this very same idea. So you would say, I go for refuge in the Buddha, I go for refuge in the Dharma, I go for refuge in the Sangha.
How do you understand Sangha? Is all the Buddhist followers or the advanced one, the stream entrant and all that? Because Don Stevens take the Sangha to be the mandala.
Just the mandala. Yeah. So I thought that Don's was actually a more pessimistic formulation. Because this seems to admit the possibility of a Sangha now.
Well, in some of the earlier, maybe in the Rahula Pura's book, one of his books, the Sangha referred to the four Buddhists who attend like entrant or the non-returner or once returner, refer to those.
I see.
So in that case, Don is very close to that.
I don't know. My understanding is that it generally seems to refer to whatever Buddhist community and monastic order you're becoming a member of. But I'm sure it's understood in many other
It may have
ways.
started out to be just the close disciples.
Sure.
And as the group expanded, then it's the community.
The community.
You know, I don't know.
What is the Dharma?
The Dharma, that's a very variable word, and we're going to see next week that it has a completely different meaning. But what here it means is actually the exposition of the truth, the vision of the truth that Buddha gave.
Yeah, Jack Kerouac, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Buddha, Jack Kerouac, it's hard to tell them apart. So actually, Buddha did not lay emphasis on himself personally, even though he winds up as one of the three. By the way, I want to say, even though Buddha never claimed any divine status, and of course there, by the way, in some of the accounts of Buddha, he seems to, acknowledge the existence of gods. It's not as though all that stuff doesn't exist in his picture of things. Is that they're subject to the same conditions as everybody else. They're impermanent, they have no real self, suffering, all of that. You see, it's not sort of this modern atheistic materialism that we have today. It's nothing like that. All of that would be in the picture with the Buddha. It's just not ultimately real. Right? So,
the Sangha, that could be any community. That could be just like...
I suppose it could be applied that way. I mean, I think back in those times it would have been very obvious. It's like I'm joining the Avatar's Abode official membership register where I am a monk of Abode. There's a formal commitment. It's not a joke in these times. So I think most people would have probably understood it in a fairly simple and literalistic way. It could mean something much deeper, of course.
That could be just humanity.
I also like one thing with the Chan Buddhism. It's called Zen, but Japanese. The Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha all became very esoteric. The essence of the mind, wisdom. So it's no longer referring to the external teaching or even Buddha himself. When it comes to Zen Buddhism, it's all changed.
One of the things about Buddhism, Baba did say that Buddha stationed himself on the fifth plane. And that's the plane of thought. So he was a very brainy avatar. And I'm joking, of course, but infinite knowledge. But I mean, you can see how he explained things. He gave a lot of explanations of stuff. And Buddhist history has had a lot of intellectual geniuses. And they developed a lot of this in greatly and taking it to places you would never guess in the beginning. Let's see, it's really time to stop. Let's see if there's any other big thing I haven't mentioned before. Okay. Well, maybe that's enough for today. It's just, next week we'll be talking about certain later phases, and some of you who know about some of these things. I mean, my own knowledge is limited. I tend to know more about earlier things than later, so anything you can contribute, please do.
Would you cover the